My name is Amalia, and I'm a webinar manager at Terminal. Terminal is the world's first tech-enabled platform for remote engineering teams. Today, we're presenting Managing Mental Health for Engineering Teams During COVID-19 with Irie, Director of Engineering at Spring Health, and Kerri McKinney, Global Head of Talent at Terminal. This webinar is part of the Going Remote by Terminal webinar series. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. Today's webinar is scheduled to last about 1 hour. All participants will be muted to enable the speakers to present without interruption. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. We'll have time to answer questions at the end of the webinar, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We hope to make this an interactive experience for all of you, so there will be moments over the course of the webinar where we'll be launching polls. We'll announce polls as we launch them, and a pop-up will appear on your screen. You should be able to submit your answer at that time. After the webinar ends, we've also prepared a short feedback survey that will show up in your browser window. We really appreciate you taking the time to answer these questions, as we'll use them to improve webinar content going forward. So lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be sent via email within 24 hours. On to our agenda. Today's webinar will start out with a quick introduction to Terminal, where we'll tell you just a little bit about what we do. Next, we'll give a bit of context on today's employee mental health landscape and the value of your mental health investment. We'll give you all some tools to assess the state of mental health and the policies that you have in place in your workplace today. We'll then move into the main portion of today's webinar, a conversation with the amazing Irie of Spring Health to hear her experiences with and her insights into managing in a way that promotes the mental health of your people. Lastly, we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. Before we start, I'd like to talk a little bit about Going Remote by Terminal. Going Remote is a monthly webinar series that delivers the insights engineering and HR leaders need to build effective remote teams. If you're looking for tips and best practices from thought leaders and industry experts to help you successfully scale remote, please stick around for an early opportunity at the end of this webinar to register for upcoming Going Remote events. Now, without further ado, we'll turn the time over to our speakers. A little bit about our presenters today. Is currently the Director of Engineering at Spring Health and was previously the Director of Engineering at DoSomething.org. She has over 10 years of experience as an engineer and engineering leader in different types of organizations, ranging from nonprofit to digital agencies to higher education. Kerri is currently the Global Director of Talent Acquisition for Terminal and has over 10 years of experience recruiting for high-growth startups across North and South America, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and in the Asia-Pacific region. Prior to joining Terminal, Kerri worked for companies like Amazon, InVision, and Indeed, where she was responsible for building out their internal executive search function and helped the company grow from 4,000 to 8,000 employees in less than 2 years. So a big welcome to both and Kerri. And Kerri, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Malia. I am super excited to be here. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And when I met I knew we would have a great conversation. So to kick things off, just wanted to give a brief overview on Terminal in case you were not aware. So if you go to the next slide. Just a little bit about Terminal. We were born, out of the same type of problems that many of our customers are looking to solve. So our journey began in 2016. We came to life as part of Atomic, a startup studio and venture capital fund. And the company, needed to quickly recruit engineers in order to validate product market fit and get off the ground running. So coming up against all of that competitive talent in, the Bay and New York, this was slowing their progress. So the co-founders came in and launched a team of 5 engineers. And now, fast forward 4 years later, Terminal has campuses in 5 different hubs throughout Canada and Mexico. And we've built remote teams and hired hundreds of engineers, supported by our unique model that really blends recruiting, HR, and operations together to really drive growth. And just a little bit, if you go to the next slide, about Spring Health. My obviously is the director of engineering at Spring Health, and Spring really combines clinically proven technology with world-class providers to deliver precisely what every employee needs, whether it's meditation program or clinical care. It's a wide range of things that they offer to employees, and they really make it easy to access whatever employees need. And you do it all on the Spring platform. So it's kind of like an improved doctor's office, since some of us probably don't like to go to the doctor's office. Spring really does it all, and it has follow-ups and check-ins. So I was really impressed when I learned a little bit about what they did. So jumping into really the reason that we're here. If you go to the next slide, we are living through one of the most stressful times in our generations right now. From people working from home for the first time ever to many working from home with kids, and some of us doing both. Everyone is going through something, and it's important to not forget that as time goes on. So I wanted to do a quick poll right before we kind of dive into things. And as soon as it launches, what % of your team do you think is currently suffering from isolation, stress, burnout, or any other mental health issue? And we'll give just about 20 to 30 seconds for everyone to answer. All right. So it looks like 44% say 20 to 50, and then the next highest is over 50%. So, it's a good starting point that I think everybody is recognizing that, people are struggling right now. So moving on, engineers in particular are at a risk for mental health issues. And leaders really need to step up and make sure that they're taking care to, when they're scoping out these different type of issues and things that come up for employees. Engineering functions in particular is one of the few that even before COVID, not many engineers worked from home, and they were used to being in that in-person environment, in a whiteboard and bounce ideas off each other. We actually did a study of over 1,000 engineers to hear their perspective on working post-pandemic. And in this survey, 1 out of 3 engineers described their mental health as fair or poor. And then in addition, if you go to the next slide, 1 in 5 engineers, there we go. 1 in 5 engineers have had to take time off from work due to mental health issues. And I think sometimes too, at least in my experience, employees have a harder time taking time off when they work remotely. People feel like they're already home, they should just push through. So I think this tells a lot of, kind of the state of some of the things we have going on right now. Furthermore, if you go to the next slide, the value of the mental health investment, I think, sometimes gets overlooked. with all of these different numbers in mind, it's not surprising that engineers say that they want companies to prioritize their mental health. And 26% of these engineers say that mental health support is one of their top 3 sought off benefits when they're considering a new employer. So when we think about that, if you go on to the next slide, despite all of this information, many companies continue to overlook the benefits of providing mental health support, and the results are quite alarming. Across the US, $193 billion was lost in lost earnings last year because of mental health issues. And what is so surprising to me, and frankly why I stumble over this number, is this was before COVID. So thinking about that number before the pandemic happened and before, frankly, the winter storm that many people are going through right now and everything else that's happened, this pandemic and everything else is causing a nationwide mental health crisis. And experts are very concerned that there's not going to be enough resources to go around. So why are we here? Well, if you go to the next slide, as an employer, I think we are in a very unique position to help our employees through this era of uncertainty by providing as many resources and emotional support however we can. Remote work, as we all know, comes with its own set of challenges. And today I'm excited to really dive into some of these incredible resources and how you can, not only support your teams, mental health, but also give your company's retention and productivity a bit of a boost in the process. The second I met Mai, as I mentioned before, I was super excited to do this webinar with her because I know she has a lot of ideas. So with that, I will hand it over to Mai to introduce herself.
Thanks so much for that introduction. I'm really excited and glad to be here. So I just wanted to provide a little additional context on who I am. I'm a working mother, right? I'm obviously a person of color too, and I'm an ambitious person. And many days I am not feeling all that great about how I'm balancing everything and feeling, frankly, like overwhelmed at times from the sheer responsibility of my home life, my work life, my role in society, right? And contributing to a more positive future, whether it's regards to climate change, racial justice, equity, the list is like innumerable at this point. So mental health is important to me, especially with all of these growing challenges, right, that we all are facing in our daily lives. And it's important that we ensure that we take moments to pause, to decompress, and make space to recharge, because frankly, we're not in a sprint, we're in a major marathon. And I just want to share a stat that made me pause as well. So 1 in 4 Americans are suffering from mental illness, and 84% folks aren't getting the care that they actually need to feel better. So accessing the right mental health care is really important to me, and I'm so excited to be working at Spring Health because we have demonstrated here that with the right care from the start, folks are experiencing faster recovery and they have 2 times the recovery rate. So that all says to me that we should be doing better and that we can. So Kerri, where can companies start in doing better?
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of segue into our next kind of topic, digging into things. Where can we start? I think one of the most important things is you have to assess, where your company stands in regards to the policies and support that they have today. It takes a lot of planning and a lot of foresight, and to start, you have to make sure where you stand, so you know how far you have to go. Before we go into the next slide, I wanted to do a quick poll question because I'm curious, what type of mental health support does your organization currently offer for those of you here? Many of you may not be sure, and that's okay, but we're curious to know kind of what types of support that you've seen so far out there. We'll give you just a few more seconds. All right. So it looks like half of us have specific measures included into just general programs. 38% not sure though, which is okay, because I think being here is a start to wanting to be more aware of it. So, all right, let's jump back in. So to start off, when you are looking at, what is your company doing? You want to start off by asking yourself some of these types of questions. And you need to keep it high level. What is your company's current policy toward mental health? Does your company offer anything at all? I know I can talk a lot about it from the people, HR, talent side, but what are some of the things that you may have found, helpful or successful to think about when it comes to engineering, and some of those questions to ask yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know we're going to get into a little bit more of the meat in a bit, but I think everything is really centered around asking these questions, right? And also erasing any stigma associated with either needing support or getting that support. So by asking questions, I don't necessarily mean like understanding the intricate details of people's needs, but rather things like questions to reflect, to ask yourself, and also to get feedback from the team. So, for example, around flexibility, especially since flexibility is really key right now. Like a very simple example to ask yourself is, do folks on my team have the flexibility to see a therapist during business hours? And if you're not sure, or if the answer is like probably not, then the next question to ask yourself as an engineering leader is, what's blocking that? Engineering leaders, we're all very concerned about the health of our engineering culture. So, we're always reflecting in terms of like our perception of how the culture is doing, and also having those tight feedback loops for, if our perception is actually matching reality. And this is something that admittedly I struggle at times myself, but I think, something that is really important in a leadership role is to be unafraid to show a bit of vulnerability ourselves. Just because we're in leadership roles doesn't mean we're invincible. We're all human. And it also opens up a little bit more space and dialogue to have more frank conversations around needs or gaps. Lastly, really also important, and something that I noticed as like a kind of pattern, is that it's really important to amplify your company's existing resources. It's really easy to forget about what all the great things that People Ops has worked so hard to provide for folks, because those conversations happen either in initial onboarding or during an annual benefits presentation. Like, granted, in this past year, I'm sure like there are way more conversations around that, but I think just amplifying what is available and understanding if there's any confusion around that is really key.
Yeah, I like how you said to really amplify the existing resources, because I think so many companies do that. They put it as part of the onboarding or the welcome, and it's a great thing for companies to have, but out of sight, out of mind. So I think it's definitely important to always have that. I love it. Cool. So in kind of relation to that, and actually this is a great segue into the next thing I wanted to kind of touch on. Building a culture of support starts by openly discussing mental health and normalizing the topic at work. And before we jump into some of the ways that you do, I want to do another quick poll and see how well has your company been prioritizing mental health over the past year? Have they at all? It's okay. We're all here for you if they haven't. Have you started thinking about it, but maybe don't have a clear plan, which is another great reason to be here. Give it just a few more seconds. All right. So it looks like the top answer is we're offering more supportive benefits and flexibility. That's great. And I think a lot of times too, companies probably may not know where to start, but know they need to start somewhere. So they just bring in anything, and then we'll start building out the more foundations later. So back to promoting it in the workplace and starting, really normalizing it, I think is a good way to put it. Not everyone is familiar with the signs of mental health issues. And I think, kind of to your point on the last slide, that's why you always have to be talking about it, even not on their first day, really pushing back the stigma and just letting everyone talk freely. I'm curious, looking back at some of the challenges of this past year and maybe before, what role do you believe having those open discussions and making employees feel comfortable to have those open discussions, how do you think that plays out in the workplace in regards to, their mental health?
Yeah, I think that we just simply cannot ignore like the compounding of stress that's outside of work and how that affects how one shows up on a given day. Your employees are still processing their perception of this country, their lack of anger, and their anger and the lack of progress. Or some folks are probably feeling PTSD from repeated racial injustices happening over and over again with Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Elijah McKinney, and countless others. So it's really important to really just take note of the current challenges that are affecting the diverse folks on your team, and really understand the different lived experiences that everybody has. Something that I want to emphasize, I mentioned in part of my own introduction about being a person of color, this pain is not something that's just that is arisen from the past year, right? Black people, especially Black men, are still being killed by police. Patrick Warren in Texas was murdered in front of his family when experiencing a mental health crisis just last month. So there are many things that are affecting folks outside of the workplace, and there are it's really crucial as leaders for us to acknowledge this, to recognize changes that we need to make and to make them, and to really have more open dialogue to ensure that the vast variety of folks on your team have both the space, the clarity, support that they need, so that they can work in an environment where they can do their very best work.
Yes, and I think one of those ways is to not celebrate stress all the time. I think something that we have all done is, oh my gosh, that person works so late and is always on first thing in the morning. Kudos to you for being such a hard worker. And that's probably not the type of, vision we want to give to people when they're joining the company. What are some tactics that have worked for you when it comes to creating a workplace culture, around mental health that supports the discussion rather than stigmatizes it?
Yeah, I think there have been many opportunities, and there will be further opportunities in the future as well to take a moment and check in with your folks. there are various ways to create open forums, whether they're via retrospective or even pausing, like after a significant event that's happened outside of work, like pausing a regularly scheduled meeting just to check in or to acknowledge what's happened. Taking a breath at the start of a meeting, especially if the previous week or the current week has been quite heavy, is really helpful. One example that I can give in terms of responding to the moment here at Spring Health is, for the inauguration day, we decided, you know what, we're going to make this a meeting-free day, and that was actually really helpful for the team. I think, like, when we ask folks, how are you doing? How are you doing? Right. It's very an automatic response to say, I'm doing fine. I'm good. Right. Just like, good morning. Good morning. So it's really important to dig in a little bit deeper. Some folks have, depending on your relationship, right, have more success with just like asking the same question with a little bit more emphasis, like, no, really, like, how are you doing? Sharing a little bit more of vulnerability, right? Like, if you're not, as a leader, having some struggles for the day, like saying, opening that conversation in that way, like in terms of sharing your own and reflections of the day or the moment. And as we know, as managers, sometimes it takes a little bit of poking to really uncover like how someone is actually doing.
Yeah, you're reminding me, we are using, we just started using a tool here called Kona, which every morning sends everyone a message, and you pick either red, yellow, or a green heart to say how you're doing. And yeah. I think you're right. Like, a lot of times you'll ask people, how are you doing? And people are going to say fine. And you want them to not be scared to say, I'm actually terrible.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I did want to touch base a little more on this, because I think one of the, the constant things that we see, as I mentioned before, especially when it comes to engineering team, is that nose to the grindstone culture and, rewarding for the time and effort you put in. How do you work to reduce stress in the workplace for your teams? Because from what I've learned so far, you don't want that type of environment for your team.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have pushes for releases, launches, what have you. That's par for the course. But even without the challenges that we're facing currently, you can't have that be a sustained pattern without the current challenges we're facing, because it'll inevitably burn out your team. Some tactics to share. So what I found really good to implement is something that I like to call a cool down sprint, if you will, after a hard push. So during a cool down sprint, it's not about like starting immediately on the next project. It's about taking some time to tackle some tech debt or UX debt, have some more time for fun team bonding time. It's also a great way to allow folks to decompress and recharge for the next project. It's not to say that like folks, like, we should be tackling like tech and UX debt like on a continuous and regular basis, but I found that engineers find this work in this cool down sprint to be quite like very satisfying as well. Being sensitive, yeah, like when the nose to the grindstone, like celebrating folks working long hours. Of course, you want to express gratitude for folks who are going that extra mile, and you want to limit how often that happens. But you want to be mindful of if there's a trend where you're only expressing gratitude, or the moments for expressing gratitude are only about firefighting or working like over the weekend to get that thing out the door. Paying attention to if whether or not that is a trend is key, because if it is, it can engender like negative sentiment on the team towards leadership, towards the org overall, and also contribute to burnout, because then they see an implicit, like they see that implicitly in order to maybe get that next promotion or opportunity, or to be a good employee, that is the model of what a good employee would do, because that's what's getting the shout outs, that's what's getting the gratitude. So, you know, I think that it's important to also express gratitude for the small things as well. And really take a look at if there's too much firefighting, and prioritize so that there is less firefighting. It's really easy to say, it's really hard to balance that in engineering. One thing that I'd like to also add, because I've worked in a lot of mission-driven organizations, I'm working for one right now, is, and I'm sure for folks who are on the call who also are part of these kind of organizations, we've thought about this, is to really take special care if you are in a mission-driven organization, not to burn out your folks in service of the mission. So your friends here are prioritization and focus on the impact and outcomes versus the output to help with that. So Kerri, is there anything else that you want to add here? I think it's really important to deal with stress. A really important way to deal with stress is also setting some guidelines around difficult situations.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. No, and I think that's a good kind of segue into the next slide, and kind of part of the discussion is setting guidelines around the new normal. And I don't know how many times people have used the term new normal. I think between that and the word unprecedented, I have just, you know, but it's true. It's the new normal. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that and let people know that, you know, things are different. So moving on, you know, as we say, you have to set guidelines and acknowledge that we're in a unique situation. What are some of the ways I'd love to hear that you've adapted your teams to these new expectations and this new normal?
Yeah, well, I'm going to push back on this new normal. I'm going to say that we need to acknowledge that this isn't normal. And I'm going to model that, because I've said already before in this webinar that, yeah, things are normal right now. So it's really important. I'm sure everyone on this call has acknowledged a couple, like at different moments, hey, like things aren't normal, like we're in a pandemic, like we're sheltering in place. Sheltering in place is not the same as working from home.
Yes.
But I think like really continuing to acknowledge that makes folks like see that you understand, that you haven't forgotten, that you're not like, now, okay, great, business as usual kind of thing. I'd do something when COVID became a reality and we began sheltering in place. The first thing that I did was I used a team retro to create space for the team to connect and openly express their struggles, their needs, their ideas for change. And I also took that moment because like it cannot go unsaid. Like it like really opened the door for when I said it, when I made those acknowledgments that like this instability and fear and uncertainty that this virus is bringing and its impact on its lives is affecting us. Like there are impossible trade-offs being made by folks who are parents like myself, especially people who are single parenting. I just can't even fathom how they're managing all this. Folks who are caring for elderly parents or folks who cannot like see their family, and as well as like, you know, really like I cannot ignore, like it's not to be ignored that there is immeasurable pain, right, from the intense sickness and countless deaths that are part of our daily experience. So no matter what the person's given situation, we are all experiencing and processing and like likely compartmentalizing and repressing this horrific, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional here, horrific experience in real time. So like taking that moment really opened up some more dialogue, and I've had good feedback from the team, and like, I really needed you to say that because it wasn't clear if leadership understood, right, what was affecting me. So taking that moment to do that is really important. More tactical things like offering flexible schedules, whether those are time shifted hours, decreased hours, leave options, and additionally really clear here, because I admittedly made this mistake myself, like establishing clear expectations, which is going to be beneficial for yourself and for the employee, so that there is clarity around like around the foundation around like future performance review conversations. Something else that I found to be really helpful is to take a moment, maybe like an hour or so. You don't have to get too stressed about it yourself, like to think about how you would approach coverage for the team if somebody actually needed to be out for an extended period of time. Like you're shooting for about 80% coverage for critical functions, understanding areas of responsibility if you're unclear, and also thinking about what would need to get deprioritized if others had to absorb these responsibilities in interim. So that's one of the, in a leadership role, that's like one of the last adaptations I would definitely emphasize.
I love that. And speaking of remote management, I think another big opportunity we have is, translating your skills to be more remote friendly. The pandemic, I think created, as we've been talking about, a big change and a crisis for managers and their teams. So it's also a great opportunity for managers to kind of take time to reflect on their own management styles, and especially if they're new to remote management. Because I think, looking at things, does your remote management style translate well, or I'm sorry, does your in-person management style translate well to remote? And are they being empathetic, like, you said? So I think this is an opportunity that a lot of people have. And it's important to remember that we can not only, help your managers get employees through the crisis, you also need to ensure that you're effectively managing your managers at the same time. So in your experience, how do you think remote leadership differs from in-person management? And what are some of the, essential skills that I think managers new to a remote environment need to be mindful of?
Yeah, I mean, being remote, it's really easy to miss signals, right? Like text-based communication channels like Slack or even a project management system doesn't convey tone. Same with the PR review, right? Mm-hmm. So, and additionally, as we're in this kind of Zoom world, it's also hard to read cues on a video call, especially if somebody has their video off in a group meeting. So really key is just assuming positive intent, like as the slide is showing, and being kind and empathetic. Having like some other things that I think like would come up when you're in person is, Kerri, you're in, I'm gonna put you out a little bit. You're in Texas right now, like being aware of like the news and how that's affecting, and saying like, hey, like sending a little message and saying like, hey, I'm thinking of you. How are you doing? Let me check in. Like, are you okay? Do you need something? What you would do exactly like in a in-person situation, you would like notice somebody or know something is affected, a person is affected by some XYZ in the news, and walk over to their desk. You can do something very similar in a lightweight fashion. On the flip side, something that is really interesting about being remote, it also offers an opportunity to pause and reconsider your perception of somebody's response as well, or their actions, and take a moment to be thoughtful in your own response, whether that's giving feedback or even asking like, hey, I'd love to give you feedback. Is this a good time? Or would you like to talk about it like in our next one-to-one in a video call, or would you like me to receive it when maybe you're not heads down, like working on a feature? So asking that and giving that space can also help somebody be mentally ready to receive the feedback as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I think to your point, you said earlier, the text-based communication is so different. I think sometimes people don't understand the power of an emoji. Like, if you have something that you want to say, and if it's maybe difficult or you just want to show some compassion, throwing in that emoji can just add a little bit of extra personality and touch to it. All right, so moving on, and I know I'm being conscious of time, and I think we're a little behind just because we're having such a great conversation. But burnout is a huge threat to remote engineers. And despite this, less than a quarter of remote work strategies address employee burnout. If you move on to the next slide, just to quickly go over a few additional statistics. So 62% of remote tech workers shared that they experienced symptoms of burnout. And if you move on to the next slide, burnout is, despite how big of a threat it is, less than a quarter of remote work strategies address employee burnout. And like every other area of mental health, being proactive when it comes to this is critical for prevention and awareness. So I just want to talk briefly a little bit about, what you have been doing on the next slide to kind of combat this burnout. What are some of the strategies that you use to flag employee burnout before it becomes a problem? Because I think, as we said, it's not something that's in the forefront of everyone's mind.
Yeah, and some engineers don't even recognize that they're on the burnout train. So there's some strategies here that are just good for performance reviews and feedback cycles as well. So one example is gathering 360 anonymous feedback every quarter. Pull out those themes, share them with your reports. You may find patterns here in this feedback where folks are expressing concern for a person that may indicate that they're stretching themselves too thin. In a team retro, you can have a simple question like, what's your battery level, right? Just similar to that green, yellow, and red color question. It could be 0, 25, 50, 75, 100%, with 0 being like, I have nothing, right, left in the tank, as a way to do a quick check-in and open up discussion. Collecting eNPS, which is employee net promoter score. It's basically like a quick question, like it could be at the team level, at department level, tech level, organization level, but like how likely would you recommend a friend to join this team, join this engineering department, what have you. And that can give you a signal where you can also run a retro around and follow up with some action items. And do that every quarter. Paying attention, like if people have certain set working hours and then they're consistently working outside of them, like you see PR being submitted like after hours, or there's Slack activity after hours, or emails, that also gives you an opportunity to just like check in your one-to-ones. So something that's really obvious, but it's worth stating, is like you can get all the information you want and all the signals, but you're seeing the same signal from multiple people, there might be a larger issue in terms of your product development process, or disconnect with business strategy, with product strategy, or there's simply some tech debt that's it's now come time to pay down because it's gotten too big or painful. So it might not be a fix at the individual or team level, but something a larger like system level or org level to sort through.
Yeah, I love that. That's super important, because I do think that'll help you look for trends when people may not want to be so forthcoming. In continuing on, something that I think is super important, just in addition to preventing, is encouraging boundaries and leading by example. It's something that I have struggled with, is leading by example and showing my team that it's okay to be, you know, down in the dumps and not feel like you always have to be on for your team. So are there certain, you know, workplace norms that you've established to combat burnout? Or, you know, how do you, I guess, what do you think your role as an engineering leader is in maintaining these norms? Because I think it can be a little, you know, slippery slope that we tread.
Yeah, that's very true. We walk a fine line in leadership, but we cannot like just play the role of like the invincible person either, because that doesn't that's not exactly leading by by example. So for example, if you respond to someone or send someone a message or an email kind of late at night and say like, hey, don't worry about this, don't respond until tomorrow. Like the mere fact that you are working after hours and you found it so important to send this person a message that probably could have waited till tomorrow communicates a certain expectation or a message. So if you really need to work after hours, like using scheduled emails, scheduled chats, if you have that integration in Slack or what have you, are you simply relying on reminders for yourself to do those follow-ups can help relieve that kind of pressure. Something that I really love is personal readmes, which are also known as like way of working docs. So folks can also detail out, like I've written one, which helps my team understand my working schedule. It's like sometimes I have blocks on my child for childcare, and so therefore, like I am not available during these time blocks unless you call me on the phone. Like, and me not breaking that that expectation that I've set is another way that I've led the example. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm working like extraordinarily long hours. I do the same pushes when needed, but I'm setting boundaries for myself, for my own mental health, for my own ability to run this marathon, right? For my team, right?
Yeah.
I need to be there for my team as well.
Yeah. You just reminded me of, and I love what you said, like scheduled emails and scheduled chats. Something that I do, I don't know why I didn't think of scheduling the emails, but if I have to send an email like after hours or on the weekend, I always put at the bottom, like, PS, this email is not to be replied to until Monday, or something that just says like, hey, I'm acknowledging that I'm sending this out of hours, like not expecting you to respond back. I love that. All right, so moving on, and I think this is something that is very important to not forget, and we've talked a little bit about this, making sure that there are not, or making sure that there are things to look forward to. You know, it's been a challenging year. Many people are feeling very isolated and lonely. And people have that deep need for social connection. You know, even when you're working remotely, it's important to have those creative moments for your employees to connect. So have you done anything at Spring to kind of boost employee engagement, or, you know, just establish new things for people to look forward to?
Yeah, so I've given some examples of some of the things that we've done for cool down periods. One thing that I want to say is like doing some more team building activities is really helpful. It's helpful, like even if you're in person, but you don't have to be the one to lead them. You can other folks can take on like thinking of the idea. Like I've had folks on or pairs of people on a team to sort out like, oh, what is this fun thing that we can do as a team to like bond? Things like scavenger hunts or virtual Pictionary, even even low stakes hangouts like a craft and hang, where some people like are crafting and other people just want to see like, what are you making? There's no need to like be there the whole time. You can pop in and out and just chat. So that doing a little socialization in that way has been fun. When I've done manager transitions for folks I've managed for a while, I've done some fun things during that manager handoff like meeting, where we had a couple of icebreakers, like a pig drawing personality test. Google that. That was a fun one. Just to lighten things up. Like it can be a little anxiety provoking when you're moving from a manager that you've been with for a while to a new one. Some of these things like don't have to be in a video call. Like there's a lot of lightweight things that you can sprinkle all throughout, whether there are if you have a daily stand-up that is thread-based in your company chat, like you can add an icebreaker there, a daily icebreaker. You can introduce a little bit more fun in terms of throwback pictures, or some fun chatter, or like what's the latest TikTok, like a little bit more to like loosen up the teams and get some like natural conversation going without it being too heavy-handed or asking folks to jump into yet another Zoom call. As a company level, we have a group called Spring Healthy that runs a number of company-wide fun events, whether they're like all company trivia, but something that I think is pretty neat here is we have like a 15-minute mindfulness session that starts the week on Mondays. And one of our employees volunteers to run it, and it can include sound meditation, easy yoga, Tai Chi, something to like ground us, and it's totally optional. So people can pop in and out as their schedule allows or as they feel the need. But that these are all various types of strategies to help de-stress, but also like have a little fun together.
Yeah. I love your mindfulness suggestion, and I think I'm going to take it for my team. But I think things like that are important. And to what you said, everyone on your team is different. So some activities are not going to jive with others. And so I think having that mix of live, Zoom, maybe Slack only is so important. Awesome. Well, I think that is all we have, and it's time to move on to Q&A. We have about 6 minutes left.
So thank you so much, Maya and Kerri, for wrapping up that discussion. So I think we had such a great conversation that we are very short on time for Q&A. I know there's a couple of questions here that I think can be answered pretty quickly. So why don't we take about 2 minutes for that? But what we're actually going to be doing is in our follow-up email, we will be including top questions from this webinar and our answers. So if you did ask a question and we don't get to it right now, you can look forward to that because answers are on the way. But Kerri, I think this is a question about something that you were talking about. So several people asked about Kona, the tool that you mentioned earlier. So do you want to elaborate a little bit on what that is?
Yeah, so it's Kona, Kona, and it is a Slack integration where it basically will send a quick message, and like I said, red, yellow, green, how are you? Your team can add a little bit, and it really is a great way to just kind of learn how people are doing in that remote environment. And it also has like profiles that you can make, and it will tell you how to best communicate with people. So it's a really cool tool. We can send it out in the email.
Great. And really quickly, I'm going to throw a question to you, Mai. Pinto asks, how do you uncover what or how your team member is feeling without being in person and easily being able to connect?
Oh my goodness, I was typing out an answer, but it does take time to build trust. Totally acknowledge that. So I love getting feedback about how I can better support a person and regularly asking for that feedback. Sometimes it also is really helpful to ask their peers, like how your folks are doing, just in case. They are more comfortable at that. Maybe they've had a longer relationship with those peers and therefore have been sharing more about like any of their struggles or challenges. And you can hear like at a high level, like, hey, yeah, I'm not sure, they might need some support, etc.
Great, thank you, Mai. So I think that pretty much concludes the time that we have for questions. But if we did not get to your question in the Q&A today, email follow-up is coming, so you will be getting an answer. All right, so thank you so much, everybody. So before we start our wrap up, I do want to preview a really exciting webinar that we're going to be hosting next month in the Going Remote by Terminal series. So I'm actually going to go ahead and launch a poll for those of you that are interested in the early opportunity to sign up for the upcoming event, as well as for the entirety of our Going Remote series. So I think leaders really have the future on their minds right now. And one of the critical considerations for this year is getting back to work in the new post-pandemic normal. So I think the workforce of 2021 is going to look pretty different. And a recent Terminal survey actually shows that 8 in 10 engineers don't just want to go back to the office. So our upcoming webinar is an awesome opportunity to hear from Bungalow Engineering VP, Duncan McDowell, on how to respond to changing engineer expectations, to overcome the tech talent shortage, how to employ new management strategies to support the workforce of 2021, and more to ensure the success of your engineering team. So just a couple of final reminders. So this webinar has been recorded and a link will be made available to participants within 24 hours over email, as well as answers to Q&A and slides. I'd also like to remind you to please provide your feedback in our post-webinar survey, which should show up in your browser window as you are leaving the call. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you so much to Mai and Kerri for the amazing discussion, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.